I'm 27 years old, a freelance writer, and I've always preferred being alone. Renting a house in a quiet, rural town in Vermont seemed like the perfect way to focus on my work. The landlord seemed friendly enough, but when he gave me the keys, he warned me about one thing. "Whatever you do, don't open the locked room in the basement," he said, his voice serious. "It's not part of the rental agreement. Just leave it alone." I didn't ask questions. The rent was cheap, and I didn't want to ruin the deal. Besides, I had no reason to go snooping around the basement. At least, that's what I thought. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent my days writing and my nights reading or watching movies. The house was old, creaky, and made plenty of noises, especially during storms. But one stormy night, as rain hammered against the windows and thunder rattled the walls, I heard something I couldn't ignore. It started with a loud bang, like something heavy being dropped in the basement. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But then came a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, like something being pulled across the floor. I told myself it was nothing, but the sounds didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and headed for the basement door. The air grew colder as I descended the stairs, each creak of the wooden steps echoing in the dark. I pointed my flashlight around the basement, my heart pounding. It was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and tools, but nothing looked out of place. Except for the locked door. The sounds were coming from behind it. I stood there, listening, my hand shaking as I held the flashlight. Another bang, followed by the unmistakable sound of something scratching the walls. My curiosity got the better of me. The landlord had warned me not to open it, but I had to know what was inside. Using a hammer I found nearby, I broke the rusty lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. What I saw inside made my stomach drop. In the center of the room was an old wooden chair with ropes and chains dangling from it, as if someone had been tied there. The walls were covered in deep scratch marks, and there were dark stains on the floor and walls that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Scattered around the room were yellowed papers. I picked one up and read it. It was a police report about the previous tenant, a man who'd been suspected of several gruesome murders. According to the report, he'd vanished without a trace. As I scanned the papers, I heard it, a faint, raspy breathing behind me. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the room, but there was no one there. The breathing stopped, but I could feel it, like someone was watching me. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. I raced upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, trying to convince myself it was all just leftover evidence of a horrible past. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. 2 days later, I woke up to loud banging on my front door. It was the police. We received a tip about suspicious activity here. One officer said as they pushed their way inside. I tried to explain that I didn't know what they were talking about, but they weren't listening. They searched the house and headed straight for the basement. When they came back up, one of the officers looked at me with disgust. "You want to explain this?" he said, holding up a blood-stained knife. "I don't. I've never seen that before," I stammered. But they weren't done. They opened the closet in my bedroom and found something that made my knees buckle. The body of a neighbor who had gone missing days ago. I swore I had nothing to do with it. I hadn't even met the man. But the evidence was overwhelming. The blood matched his, the knife had my fingerprints, and the body had clearly been hidden in my house. They arrested me on the spot. Sitting in the interrogation room later that night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror on the wall. My face was pale, my eyes hollow with fear. But then I noticed something that made my stomach churn. My reflection was smiling. I wasn't. To this day, I don't know what really happened in that house or how I ended up framed for a murder I didn't commit. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel like someone, or something, is watching me. And I'll never forget that twisted grin in the mirror. I'm Riley, a 22-year-old college student, and I've always been pretty independent. After a messy breakup, I decided to move out of the place I shared with my ex and find a fresh start. The apartment I found was nothing fancy, just a cheap one-bedroom on the edge of town in upstate New York. It wasn't great, but the price fit my budget, and I figured I'd only be there for a year or so until I got back on my feet. The first few nights were quiet. The building was old and creaky, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then one night, as I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, I heard it, a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, but when I listened more closely, I realized it was coming from the vent near my bed. The voice was too soft to make out any words, so I assumed it was just my upstairs neighbor talking on the phone. I shrugged it off and went to sleep, but the whispers didn't stop. Every night around the same time, I'd hear them. They seemed to grow louder and more distinct. It wasn't long before I could make out what they were saying. Riley? My heart dropped the first time I heard my name. I froze in bed, staring at the vent. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe I was just stressed and tired. But the next night, the whispers came back, and they were worse. They started mentioning details about my life, things no one could know. They whispered about my daily routine, my classes, and even personal things, like how I always left the bathroom light on at night because I hated the dark. I started to get paranoid. I taped a blanket over the vent to block the sound, but it didn't help. The whispers turned into muffled cries, like someone was begging for help. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I went upstairs to confront my neighbor. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I knocked again, harder this time, but the apartment was silent. Frustrated, I went back to my place and tried to sleep, but the whispers kept me awake. The next morning, I went to the landlord's office to complain. That's when I learned something that made my stomach churn. "There's no one living above you," he said, looking confused. "What?" I asked, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. "That apartment's been vacant for years," he said. "It's just storage now." I tried to convince myself it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the landlord was wrong, or maybe someone had snuck in and was staying there without permission. Either way, I had to know. I called the locksmith and told him I'd locked myself out of a friend's apartment. He didn't ask questions and popped the lock for me in minutes. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me, a mix of mold and something metallic. The apartment was dark and empty, but I immediately noticed the mattress in the corner of the room. It was old and stained, with springs poking out of the sides. Then I saw the walls. They were covered in photos. My photos. There were pictures of me walking to class, sitting in coffee shops, and even standing in my kitchen. But the worst ones were the photos of me sleeping. My blood ran cold as I realized they were taken from the vent, looking straight down into my bedroom. I backed away, my hands shaking. That's when I saw the most recent photo, taped right in the center of the wall. It was a picture of me, sleeping in my bed, from last night. I didn't wait to find out more. I ran out of that apartment and straight to my car. I didn't even bother packing my things. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. As I drove down the dark, empty road, I tried to calm myself. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me. But what I saw instead was worse. In the faint glow of the streetlights, I saw a figure sitting in my backseat. I slammed on the brakes and whipped around, but the seat was empty. My heart was racing, and I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if something was truly after me. I didn't stop driving until I reached a friend's house hours away. I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. Every time I hear a faint whisper or feel like someone's behind me, my heart races. I'll never know who or what was in that apartment, but I'll never forget those whispers calling my name. I'm Charlotte, 27 years old, working as a graphic designer in Seattle. After a messy fallout with my old landlord, I had to move out fast. That's how I ended up renting a room in a shared house with a woman named Mallory. She was in her early 30s, well-dressed and polite, but there was something about her that felt off. From the start, Mallory was clear about the house rules. There were curfews for locking the front door, no loud music, and absolutely no entering each other's rooms. Her tone was friendly, but firm, like she was testing how far she could push. At first, everything seemed fine. She wasn't the warmest person, but we didn't interact much, and the house was quiet and clean. It was perfect for focusing on work. But as the days went by, Mallory's behavior started to bother me. She always seemed to know where I was and what I was doing. If I came home late from work, she'd casually comment on how long I'd been gone. She even mentioned things about my past that I was sure I'd never told her, like the name of my childhood dog or my favorite coffee shop. One night, I came home to find her staring at a photo of me and my friends that I kept on the fridge. She smiled and said, "You have such a nice life, Charlotte." Her tone sent a shiver down my spine. Things escalated quickly after that. I started noticing little things out of place. My laptop moved slightly, drawers left half open, even my toothbrush wet when I hadn't used it. I convinced myself it was paranoia. After all, Mallory seemed harmless, right? Then, one night, everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke to a loud crash. My heart raced as I lay in bed listening. It came from Mallory's room. For a moment, I debated staying put, but curiosity got the better of me. I crept into the hallway and saw her door ajar. Mallory was obsessive about keeping it locked, so seeing it open was enough to make my skin crawl. I pushed the door open and immediately regretted it. The room was nothing like I expected. The walls were covered with missing person posters, faces of women, all smiling, with dates and locations scrawled beneath them. On the floor was a pile of wallets, IDs, and credit cards, none of them hers. But the worst part was the journal on the desk. I opened it with trembling hands, flipping through pages filled with notes about me. My daily routine, my favorite foods, even the clothes I wore. Then I saw the last entry. Charlotte's life fits me perfectly. Tomorrow, I'll make the switch. I staggered back, my mind racing. She was planning to kill me. I had to get out. I bolted for the kitchen to grab my phone and call the police. But before I could dial, something slammed into the back of my head. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the windows. My head throbbed, and I was lying on the kitchen floor. The house was eerily quiet. Mallory was gone. On the table, there was a note in her neat handwriting. "Your life fits me perfectly. Thanks for letting me borrow it." Panic set in as I tried to piece everything together. I called the police and explained everything, but when they arrived, they found no trace of Mallory, no ID, no fingerprints, nothing. It was like she never existed, but she had. Over the next few days, my life unraveled. My credit cards were maxed out, my work email had been deactivated, and my friends started acting like I was a stranger. When I tried calling my boss to explain, I found out that I'd resigned 2 days ago. I was losing everything. Then, one evening, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was silence, followed by a soft laugh. "Thanks for the life, Charlotte," Mallory's voice said. "It really does fit me perfectly." The line went dead, and I knew she wasn't finished with me. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that she's out there, watching, waiting for the moment I try to rebuild what she stole. I don't sleep much anymore. Every sound, every shadow feels like her. Mallory didn't just take my life, she took my peace, and I have no idea how to get it back.